is Dr. Ify with Ify Talks, and I am here at Ubuntu, African and Caribbean cuisine. I'm here with author Gregory Proctor. He is the author of Faith, Strength, and Courage. And he's talking about the memoir of overcoming his trials and vicissitudes. And I am so happy to hear his story. Can you tell us, why did you write this book? What is the story behind the book?
Well, the story behind the book is obviously a true story. It's based on my life's journey of dealing with multiple myeloma, which obviously is a blood cancer in the same category as lymphoma and leukemia. I started out writing this book based on the notion of finding a way to allow for my feelings to be released. Dealing with a tumultuous experience such as multiple myeloma, having life-threatening illness, dealing with pain and severity, not knowing if you're going to survive, I just felt that it was something that I needed to be able to share with the world. Mm-hmm. And as a part of that, I actually took to social media, which was one of the reasons I think the book kind of came to life, was because I took to social media. Yeah. It became very therapeutic for me to be able to sit down, write every night, just to kind of, let those feelings, let those emotions out. The birth of Faith, Strength, and Courage came to life.
Wow. Okay, I want to know, I'm sure we want to know, you're here now. By God's grace, you're here. Mm-hmm. But tell us, how did it start? How did you know that you had cancer? What happened?
Wow.
Tell us that story. What led you to say, okay, something's not right? Because we have to know what's going on with our bodies. And oftentimes we'll start taking aspirin or taking something to deal with pain, right? So at what point you say, you know what, Advil, this is not working? At what point did you know, and you knew something was not really right and that it was really serious?
Well, very similar to what we're doing right now is how things came about with me as far as, my overall diagnosis. I do run, a podcast called Cut to the Chase. Yeah. And throughout that podcast, I was starting to experience back pain, in my lower right area. Mm-hmm. And from there, started taking Tylenol, being pretty much the macho guy, insinuating maybe I pulled a muscle, maybe I'm sitting wrong position, whatever the case may be. And then the pain just continued to persist over time. Probably about the second day, maybe the third day as I'm recording podcasts, I felt this pain, just the toleration of the pain was more than I could bear. Yeah. And that night I went to bed. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately for me, I could not wake up. And when I woke up, it was like the pain, the intensity left me in a very, let's just say, immobile situation. And at that point, I knew something was very, very wrong.
Okay, so you had just left your podcast, you went to bed. Did you think that, perhaps I pulled a muscle, there was something? Was it that kind of pain, or was it like, okay, God, what is this?
This was an, okay, God, what is this?
Yeah.
Because when I say I could not move my lower extremities, I was literally paralyzed from the waist down.
My goodness.
So in order for me to get out of the bed, it was like a military roll onto the floor. Yeah. And my wife was out of the country at the time, and I was military crawling to the door just to try to get out of the house in order to be able to seek medical attention. Yeah. And what we realized at that point in time, obviously through x-rays and other various tests, which persisted over the next several weeks, is that I had a tumor that had protruded through my bone marrow on my upper right hip. Yeah. My spleen was fractured. I had a lot of rib cage damage, and the disease was, representation of 100% bone lesions. So I was in really, really critical condition. Yeah. And at that point in time, it was, like I would say, immediately that, I was placed on chemo treatment and continued that journey through chemo treatment, which we'll talk about.
That's the next thing I want to hear. So you went to the doctor diagnosed you. Mm-hmm. And I want to know, what was your emotion when you heard, because sometimes people hear cancer and it's like, It's over, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's over because you're here. But take me through those emotions that you felt in that moment.
Sure. So we went through 3 series of doctors. I saw my general practitioner first. Obviously, he took blood, gave me inflammatory shots and basically said, okay, Greg, I'll see you back in a couple days after we get the blood work back.
Yeah.
By the time he called me back, I was already at the second doctor, which was my spine management doctor, because the pain was so severe I couldn't wait. Spine management doctor said, Mr. Proctor, let's get you in for some MRIs. Yeah. We did 2 series of MRIs. First one non-contrast, second one with contrast. The second one was a representation of cancer. He basically told me, and at this point in time, my wife was back in town, go see an oncologist now. Just like Monopoly, collect your $200, don't pass go, and just go. So we couldn't find an oncologist at the time. We searched around for maybe 48 hours trying to get somebody to see me. Every call was no, no, no. We finally found one oncologist. This was on a Wednesday. She saw me. She says, I'm going to have to run you through more series of tests. And we went through blood work and, bone density, you name it, everything. And of course, one particular test that really stands out, which they do for every blood cancer patient, is what they call a bone marrow biopsy. Okay. And obviously for me, it was the first time going through that encounter, which was extremely painful, even with local anesthesia. Yeah. She got the results back on a Friday afternoon. We walked into her office and she said, Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, this is what you have. She's, obviously going through the gamut. You've got multiple myeloma, IgA kappa, P17 deletion, 2 submutated genes. We were basically saying, okay, this is all Greek to us. What are you telling us? Yeah. And she was trying to explain it all to us, and we were comprehending as much as we could. But the words that really resonated at that point in time, keep in mind, this is on a Friday. Yeah. Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, please go home and get your affairs in order.
My.
Now, when you hear those words, everything else is turned off, okay? Yeah. Completely turned off. Yeah. And so my wife and I were in shock at this point. We were obviously hearing, this is what you have, this is the diagnosis, but those words, we're looking at each other like, am I going to die? Yeah. And so for her, she was saying, I need for you guys to trust me. Yeah. And by blind faith, how can you just instill your life into someone else's hand besides the Lord Jesus Christ above? Yeah. And so here it is, coming from a background of being an individual that is always driven, motivated, independent, in control, having to have that control stripped away was something that I felt like I was unable to cope with at that moment in time. Yeah. Having my life faced with its ending in front of me was something that I was dealing with in a very, say, psychologically difficult way. Yeah. Because it put me into a depressive stage where I felt like maybe I should just give up, for a single moment in time. Maybe I should just give up. And it wasn't until maybe a week or so after starting chemo where a good mutual friend of ours, who was actually taking me to chemo at the time, Jacqueline Smith, set us in the car and said, Greg, you've managed projects all over the world, multi-million, multi-billion dollar jobs. You know how to do all this stuff. Yes. I need for you to put this into your wife so that you can focus on surviving. Yes. And so my wife and I went into the house. We talked, brainstormed, and put our minds together and really dove into, okay, you know what, we've got to prepare ourselves for this battle that we're in. Yeah. We know we have faith, we know we have modern medicine, but we've got to prepare ourselves psychologically, physically, mentally as well. So I instilled everything I possibly could into my wife to make her the project manager. Yes. And me the project. Yes. And she dealt with all of the doctors, the communications with the doctors, the diets and so forth and so on. And really the only thing I needed to focus on was just my survival. And keep in mind, during this time, I was a zombie. I was on chemo. For the listeners that are out there, being on chemo 5 days a week, 6 to 8 hours per day, is psychologically a full-time job for nearly 4 months. There is nothing else in the world that you can do when you are in the throes of that type of treatment. Yeah. It is chemo, home, sleep. Chemo, home, sleep. And on Saturdays and Sundays, when you're just now starting to get out of this lethargic phase, then you're back in the throes of it again. Yeah. And so it was like riding this emotional roller coaster up and down every single week, and the taste and all of the other symptoms and everything that goes along with it. It was just enough to rip your soul out. Yeah. And so for me, I was needing that outlet. Yeah. And when I took to social media, it wasn't something that was agreed upon, because in most cases, and I just want to say this very candidly, right? In most cases, as men, we don't typically like to share our emotions. We're not vulnerable, And I'll just be honest with everybody. I found power in my pain. I found opportunity in vulnerability. And of course, being a beacon of hope and a beacon of inspiration to those that I, talk with in my community that deal with the same disease, being a voice of reasoning that allows for me to be able to help people uplift their souls and nurture their spirits to be able to move forward, through this tumultuous experience and be able to thrive, because that's what it's all about. And so, as I started to look at this overall picture, I began to realize that this is just a chapter in my life. It doesn't define how I go forward. It doesn't define, what my future is going to be. But I said I needed to take this opportunity to make the best of it. Yeah. Because the way I'm living now is like a rebirth.
Yes, I love that word.
It's like I'm born again.
Yes.
And I think that's very powerful when you think about all of the things you go through with this disease, and you get to the point of stem cell transplant and they kill off your immune system, and then they reboot you like a computer. I mean, you are born again, literally. Yeah. I mean, it's just like a mad science project. Yeah. I mean, it's something that is almost incomprehensible in a lot of cases, but hey, they've done it to literally thousands of patients around the world, and it works. And so, I'm just here, not only through the grace of God, but just basically being blessed by, my family, friends, and the community. I mean, the community has allowed for me to really show that side of vulnerability and be inspired by that, which I think is just something that, most people refuse to do. And I'm glad that that's my new mission now, because I'm embracing it,
I'm 100%. So glad. I'm so glad. I'm glad that you took that pain and you said, you know what? I can sulk. I can say, woe is me. I can go from pain to pity, but you went from pain to power. Now, in the throes of that, at what point did you say, you know what, God, okay, here I am. Use me. I'm going to use my voice. I am going to help people. I'm not going to just sit down and feel sorry for myself. There was a reason. I'm not saying you did it to me, God, but there is a reason that I am facing this vicissitude in life. Now, God, at what point did you say, God, use me? I'm ready. I'm here. I want to tell other people that, you know what, you will live and you shall not die, and you will see and glorify and walk in the works of the Lord. At what point did you get to that point?
Well, this is something that I probably have never shared, really, and it's such an emotional thought, just to think about it, because actually it's not even in the book. So one night, as I'm going through this vicious cycle of chemo, and the inability to be able to sleep, when your spleen is fractured, your ribs, and all of this, unbeknownst pain that's going on, it's very hard for you to lay down horizontal. Yeah. So you have to sleep vertical. Right. And so one night, as I'm kind of vertically in the position of the bed, just basically trying to get some remnants of sleep, I just sat up on the edge of the bed. And for me, it felt like somebody had reached out and touched me.
My.
And basically said, this is going to be okay.
Oh, yes.
And for me, I talk about this in the book, how, I had gotten lost, from my faith, because of worldly, chasing worldly things and, being too busy to get myself back involved with the church. And, at the point in time we got back involved with church, but all of these things started to kind of combine together into something so powerful. Is really how the title Faith, Strength, and Courage came all about.
My. I love that. You know what really touched me? When you talked about the touch. And I just want to briefly talk about a time when I was told that I was barren. And I know the Lord touches us and we can feel his touch. And the Lord said, no more. I felt him in South Korea. So I definitely understand that touch that you're talking about. And it is a calming touch. It revives you to say, you know what? I will live and I shall not die. Let's go. Right? Okay, so you had a visit from the Lord. Now you're like, okay, I know I'm going to be okay. We went through some of the trials. Tell me after that happened, at what point did you say, you know what? Yeah, let's go. We got this. You looked at your beautiful wife. You said, talk to your family. Said, we got this. Let's go. At what point did that happen? And then tell me what it did culminate into.
Well, there's a lot of things that happened. I think the first thing that happened was, I started preparing my mind psychologically to be focused in the admiration of mental fortitude, because those things are extremely important. Understanding that going through the treatment put me into a very, kind of, I would say like almost like an apocalyptic type phase, zombie phase, because you really don't know where you are. I found that I was able to kind of weather the drugs a little bit better. Phase of, thinking that I'm going to die, because at this point I'm starting to feel like I'm going to make it to the other side of this, and I've got this feeling of the Spirit that has basically wrapped his arms around me and allowed for me to kind of understand and appreciate that this is not going to go in vain. Everything that I was going through. And so, from that standpoint, it became a mission for me. It became a mission to communicate, to ensure not only from a perspective of like, if I'm going through this, how can I prevent others from going through this? How can I educate others? And really that became the initial onset of my mission, was like getting my families educated, because they were like, you can just go in and have it cut out. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, not to joke about this, but this is a blood cancer. You can't survive without blood. I mean, it's like, what?
Exactly.
So going down those paths and really just pouring in a lot of, time studying and researching, learning about the specificities of my disease, because in the situation of all of those things that the doctor said before, multiple myeloma, IgA kappa, P17 deletion, 2 submutated genes, all of that back then was very much Greek, like I said. But now we understand that in the cases of all of those things that culminated together, which my diagnosis represents, it puts me at a high risk state, and being immunosuppressant, immunocompromised. And so all of these things, knowing those things, changed the trajectory of my life and allowed for me to be a little bit more cognizant, more aware of things that are more important, that, certainly can, inhibit me from getting sick or more ill in those type of situations. And so, we really focused our energy around our education, because it became such a paramount for us to know the do's and the don'ts, And for many, many years, many years, and what I want to emphasize here, which you'll read about in the book, is I was diagnosed at the age of 50. I mean, this is like, what type of birthday present is that?
Oh, wow.
Being diagnosed at the age of 50. At the age of 50. You've lived halfway through your life, and you're saying, oh my God, this is what my life was prior to. What is my life going to be after? And so all of these things just begin to kind of, pour out of me in a way that I say, things that I didn't like, it's time to change. Things that I should have done and maybe, I should have thought about, it's time to kind of reinforce those. And, I like to emphasize here the importance of like going to the doctor,
Good.
getting to your routine checks.
Yeah.
You know, as men, sometimes we're like,
I got it.
We blow this off. We
Yeah.
blow this off. And honestly, you know, in the stages of multiple myeloma and all of the variations of types, this disease can stay dormant.
My.
And you can get a test to find out if the disease
is dormant in you.
Is dormant in you. That's right. That's correct.
Okay.
And so a lot of times when you have this in your family, not to say that it's hereditary, but it's very wise, you know, to go out and get these type of tests done to ensure that you're better prepared, you know, down the road.
So make sure, especially men, that you go and check your health.
That's right.
Herbs are not going to help it. The teas are not going to help it.
Mm-hmm.
My father loved herbs, and so he felt that herbs that he grew up with in Nigeria would help. But no, that's why God have given us doctors. And he gave the doctors the wisdom. So please go and get checked. Gregory, what word of encouragement do you have for the audience right now, that some people that may be experiencing this may have closed themselves up, may have shut down? What encouragement can you give to the audience?
You know, I get asked this question a lot, and there's one word that I always refer back to, and I'm going to expand on this a little bit, but that one word is acceptance. Acceptance is so palatable, is so powerful in the overall context of where you are in the throes of your trials, tribulations, setbacks, divorce, financial, whatever it is understanding that you have accepted the circumstances and the situation. Because if you have not embraced that, then you're not preparing your mind, your body, and your spirit with the ability to be able to move forward. It's like they say, you carry this burden with you. And when you don't accept, this burden is still dragging you down. Yeah. And so it's very important to be able to accept, you know, how you move forward with whatever this challenge or tribulation may be in your life. Yeah. Now, there's other aspects to this that I'd like to share as well, and that is getting yourself educated.
Yeah.
You know, when you deal with things that throw you back, you know, you have to sit back and ask yourself the one question: what could I have done differently? And it's like the old cliche. A lot of people go, oh, you know, that's just a cliche. But, you know, what could you have done differently?
Right.
For me, I always say, hey, I should have gone to the doctor. I should have had blood work. I should have done this. I should have done that. All of these things leading up to the age of 50, I should have done.
Yeah.
I neglected to do those because, like I said, I was tied up in worldly circumstances and tied up, you know, trying to grow a company, growing a business, and doing all the things except for focusing on me.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the things that when you deal with trials and tribulations, setback and adversity, you have to be a little bit selfish.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people that are your friends may not be your friends. They may not be there to support. You know, you've got to find the right community to embrace you and continue to lift you up, not only mentally but spiritually as well. And I think those things are so, so important. And I guess the last thing I would have to say, and people may say, well, this is another cliche, but for me, it's very true if you open up your eyes, because you really have to look at things differently. When you're in the throes of whatever's going on in your life, you've got to look at things differently. You always have to know that you're not in this situation alone.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Gregory.
Thank
you. The name of the book is Faith, Strength, and Courage. It is a memoir of overcoming adversity and embracing life's journey. This is Dr. Ify with Ify Talks. I am so grateful that you came again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you next month on Ify Talks. As always, peace in and to God.